Welcome to the very first episode of Built to Bust, the podcast where we dive into the failures, frauds, and corporate disasters that reshape the business world. I'm Brian, your host, and joining me is my co-host and friend Layla.
Hello, everyone.
Together, Layla and I will unravel the most incredible and fascinating stories of frauds, downfalls, and treason in the business world.
Right, and what's so fascinating about these stories is the psychology behind them, the ambition, the drive, and sometimes the utter deception that fuels these meteoric rises.
Oh, yeah.
And dramatic falls.
And for our very first episode, we're diving into the world of Bernie Madoff. Now, you've probably heard his name.
Of course.
Practically synonymous with financial scandal.
Right.
But do you really know how he pulled off the largest Ponzi scheme in history?
It's a story that is as baffling as it is captivating.
It is.
This man who started with just $5,000,
Wow.
earned as a lifeguard,
Yeah.
built an empire that would ultimately cost investors an estimated $50 billion.
$50 billion.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that kind of money.
It's a huge number.
So how did he do it?
That's what we're here to uncover.
Okay.
We're going to take you through Madoff's journey chronologically, from his early days to the moment his house of cards came tumbling down.
Okay.
And trust me, the deeper we go, the more intriguing this story gets.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of Madoff's story, let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
What exactly is a Ponzi scheme?
At its core, a Ponzi scheme is a type of financial fraud. It preys on people's desire to make money, promising high returns with little to no risk.
Right.
The problem is those returns aren't generated through actual investments or business activities.
So where does the money come from?
It comes from new investors.
Okay.
Basically, early investors are paid with money from later investors.
Got it.
It creates this illusion of success, a constant flow of profits, which entices even more people to invest.
Right.
But it's completely unsustainable.
Okay.
It's like a giant bubble just waiting to burst.
And that bubble always bursts, right?
Always. The scheme relies on a constant influx of new money.
Yeah.
The moment that flow slows down or investors start asking for their money back, the whole thing collapses.
Oh, wow.
And the later you get in, the more likely you are to lose everything.
It's a scary thought. So let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
What was Bernie Madoff like before he became this infamous mastermind behind this massive fraud?
Madoff's story, at least on the surface,
Yeah.
seemed like a classic rags to riches tale.
Okay.
He started out installing sprinklers.
Wait, that's not exactly the typical Wall Street pedigree.
Right. But it gets even more interesting. In 1960, Madoff took his savings of $5,000, roughly $50,000 in today's money,
Okay.
and founded his own firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities.
And this is where the story gets interesting.
Absolutely. This was a time when most trading was still done manually,
Wow.
but Madoff was an early adopter of electronic trading systems.
Wow.
This positioned him as an innovator, a forward thinker in a rapidly changing industry. This tech savviness gave him a competitive edge and helped him rise quickly in the financial world. He even played a role in the development of the NASDAQ, the electronic stock market we know today.
So he was a pioneer in a way,
Yeah.
using technology to disrupt the traditional ways of doing things on Wall Street.
Exactly. And that early success gave him a certain aura of legitimacy and credibility.
So he was already making waves early on.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
He quickly gained a reputation for being savvy and successful.
Right.
At its peak, Madoff's firm was handling a staggering 10 to 15% of the trading volume on the New York Stock Exchange.
Those are some serious numbers.
They are.
Yeah.
He was a Wall Street heavyweight,
Mm.
and to further solidify his image,
Yeah.
Madoff became known for his philanthropic activities. He was donating to charities, funding political campaigns, even serving on the boards of prestigious organizations.
So he was building this aura of respectability and generosity. But alongside this drive for success, he was also building a personal life.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Madoff married his high school sweetheart, Ruth Alpern, and they had 2 sons, Mark and Andrew. And get this, both sons eventually ended up working for him.
Wow. Talk about keeping it all in the family. So
Yeah.
we've got this picture of Madoff, ambitious, tech-savvy, successful, family man.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't stop there.
Okay.
Madoff cultivated this air of exclusivity around his investment funds.
Uh-huh.
He would often turn away potential investors, making his funds seem like a privileged opportunity.
Wow.
Something that only a select few could access.
It's almost like he was creating a myth around himself and his business.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that myth played a crucial role in the success of his Ponzi scheme.
So at this point, was he already running the Ponzi scheme?
That's a question that has been debated for years.
Right.
Some believe he started out with legitimate intentions and gradually slid into fraud, while others think he was a master manipulator from the very beginning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Either way, at some point, the facade began to crack.
And when it did, the repercussions were felt around the world.
Yeah.
But before we get to that dramatic downfall, we need to delve into the mechanics of Madoff's scheme, how he managed to keep it going for so long, and who ultimately brought it crashing down.
Okay, so we've established that Madoff's early success and his carefully crafted image played a big part in attracting investors.
Right.
But how did the actual scheme work?
Sure. In the simplest terms, a Ponzi scheme is like a financial illusion. You're making investors believe their money is growing, when in reality, you're just using money from new investors to pay off older ones. There's no real investment happening, no actual profits being generated. It's all about creating a facade of success, like a giant financial shell game.
So it's essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul, but on a massive scale.
Precisely. And the longer it goes on, the more unsustainable it becomes. You need a constantly growing pool of new investors to keep the illusion alive. Eventually, the whole thing collapses when the new money dries up or when too many people try to cash out at once.
Okay, so that's the basic idea. But how did Madoff apply this to his operation? How was he able to keep this charade going for decades?
Well, he had a legitimate-looking trading operation with hundreds of employees, creating this air of bustling activity.
Right.
But the part of the business where he was managing the Ponzi scheme was shrouded in secrecy.
So he kept his asset management business completely separate from his legitimate brokerage operation. So it was harder to track what he was really doing.
Right. He was very compartmentalized and secretive about his activities. Only a handful of people knew the true nature of his scheme, and those who did were sworn to secrecy. He also went to great lengths to fabricate trading records and account statements, creating a paper trail that seemed to support his claims of impressive returns.
He was basically cooking the books, making it look like he was making these incredible trades, when in reality, it was all just smoke and mirrors.
That's it. And for a long time, no one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't want to ask too many questions. People were making money, and they were happy. Madoff was also very skilled at deflecting any inquiries or suspicions. He had an answer for everything, always able to spin a believable tale.
It's crazy how he managed to keep this going for so long. Were there any red flags that people missed along the way?
There were definitely red flags. Some people in the financial industry questioned how Madoff was able to achieve such consistent returns, especially in volatile markets. A few even tried to alert the SEC. In fact, a financial analyst named Harry Markopoulos spent years trying to alert the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, about Madoff's suspicious activities.
Wait, so the SEC, the organization tasked with protecting investors, was aware of these red flags?
Yes. But for a variety of reasons, they failed to act decisively.
That's unbelievable.
Markopoulos provided detailed analysis, pointed out the statistical impossibilities of Madoff's returns, and even suggested that it was a Ponzi scheme, but his warnings were largely ignored.
That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
How could they miss something this big for so long?
It's a complex issue.
Yeah.
There were certainly some failures within the SEC, a lack of resources, perhaps a degree of complacency, and possibly even some bureaucratic inertia that prevented them from taking Markopoulos' warnings seriously. They conducted multiple investigations into Madoff's business practices, and somehow they failed to uncover the truth. It was a massive failure of oversight, and it allowed Madoff to continue operating his scheme for years longer than he should have.
It almost begs the question, was there any willful blindness on the part of regulators? Did they just not want to see what was right in front of them?
Well, that's certainly been debated. Some believe the SEC was simply incompetent, while others suspect there may have been more nefarious reasons for their failure to act, whatever the explanation. The result was that Madoff was able to continue defrauding investors for years longer than he should have.
It's amazing how many people chose to ignore those red flags.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
Well, there's the allure of easy money, of course. People wanted to believe that they had found a way to beat the system, to achieve financial security without taking any real risks.
Right.
And Madoff's persona, the Wall Street guru, the philanthropist, the man who turned people away because his funds were so exclusive, that just added to his credibility.
He was almost like a financial rock star.
Yes, and that star power combined with the promise of consistent profits
Yeah.
was incredibly seductive.
But it wasn't just individual investors who were getting caught up in this, right?
Right.
Didn't Madoff attract some pretty big institutions as well?
He did, and that's where the concept of feeder funds comes in.
Feeder funds?
Yeah, these are essentially investment funds that pool money from multiple investors and then invest it in other funds or assets.
Okay.
In Madoff's case, many feeder funds poured billions of dollars into his scheme.
So these feeder funds became a major pipeline, funneling money from all over the world directly to Madoff.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it wasn't just the allure of high returns that attracted these funds.
Right.
Madoff leveraged his connections, particularly within the Jewish community.
Okay.
He used personal relationships to build trust, to create a sense of exclusivity, almost like a secret club that everyone wanted to be part of.
Wow. And this went on for decades.
It did.
And while the SEC was failing to connect the dots,
Right.
Madoff's scheme was growing, becoming this massive global operation almost too big to fail.
Except, of course, it was destined to fail.
Right.
And the trigger for that failure came in 2008 with the global financial crisis.
So the same crisis that led to bank bailouts and widespread economic hardship was also the catalyst for Madoff's downfall.
Yes.
How did that happen?
As the markets crashed, investors panicked.
Right.
They needed their money, and they started requesting withdrawals from Madoff's funds.
And this created a problem for Madoff.
Because he didn't have the money.
Oh, right. Remember, it was all a shell game? He was using new money to pay off old investors.
Right, right.
But with the market crash, that flow of new money dried up.
So the music stopped, and there weren't enough chairs for everyone.
Madoff tried desperately to keep up appearances, but the cracks were starting to show.
Yeah.
He couldn't honor the withdrawal requests, and the illusion of success began to unravel.
So what happened next? How did it all finally come crashing down?
Well, Madoff knew the game was up in December of 2008. He confessed to his sons that his entire business was a giant lie.
Wow.
He was broke, and the money was gone.
I can only imagine the shock and betrayal his sons must have felt.
It was a devastating revelation, not just for his family, but for thousands of investors worldwide.
Right.
Madoff's sons turned him into the authorities.
Wow.
And the story that had been whispered about in financial circles for years finally exploded onto the front pages.
So Madoff's sons turn him in.
Right?
The news breaks.
Yeah.
And suddenly this massive fraud is exposed for the whole world to see. It all happened very quickly.
What happened next?
Well, it was chaos, essentially.
Yeah.
Investors were in utter disbelief.
Of course.
The media went into a frenzy, and the authorities scrambled to figure out the full scope of the damage.
Yeah, it must have been like a financial earthquake.
Oh, absolutely.
What were the immediate consequences?
Well, Madoff was arrested almost immediately
Wow.
and charged with 11 federal felony counts,
11.
including securities fraud, money laundering, and perjury. His assets were frozen, and the legal process began to unfold.
Did he try to fight the charges?
No, he actually pleaded guilty to all charges.
Really?
It was a stunning admission of guilt for a man who had spent decades cultivating an image of success and respectability.
I can't imagine what it must have been like for his victims.
Yeah,
Realizing that their life savings had vanished.
it was devastating.
Yeah.
People lost their homes, their retirement funds, their children's college funds.
Oh, wow.
Charities were forced to shut down, and even large institutions took massive financial hits.
It's just unbelievable, the ripple effect of this.
Yeah, the human cost was immeasurable.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to shift our focus to the human side of this story. We've talked about the mechanics of Madoff's scheme, the impact on investors, the failure of regulators. But what about the people closest to him, his family? How do they cope with the fallout of his crimes?
Well, as you can imagine, it was devastating for them. His sons, Mark and Andrew, were not only faced with the realization that their father was a criminal, but they were also thrust into the spotlight, vilified by the public, and pursued by the media. It was an incredibly difficult and painful experience for them.
And tragically, both sons ended up taking their own lives. Mark, in 2010, on the second anniversary of his father's arrest, and Andrew in 2014 after a long battle with cancer. It's hard to even fathom the depth of their despair.
It's a truly heartbreaking chapter in this saga, and it speaks to the ripple effects of Madoff's actions, the way his crimes reached far beyond the financial realm and into the lives of those closest to him.
And what about his wife, Ruth? She wasn't involved in the business, but she certainly benefited from Madoff's ill-gotten gains. How did she fare in the aftermath?
Ruth Madoff has always maintained that she was completely unaware of her husband's criminal activities. She claimed to be a victim herself, deceived by the man she loved. Whether or not that's true is something that has been debated endlessly.
It's hard to believe that she could have been totally oblivious to what was going on, especially given their lavish lifestyle. They had multiple homes, yachts, expensive art, a seemingly endless flow of money.
You're right, it does seem improbable. But ultimately, she was never charged with any crimes, and she reached a settlement with the authorities, keeping a small portion of her assets, around $2.5 million. She lost everything else, their homes, their belongings, their social standing. It was a dramatic fall from grace.
From living a life of luxury
Yeah.
to being ostracized and facing financial ruin. So what happened to Madoff?
Mm.
What was his punishment?
Well, he was given the maximum sentence, 150 years in prison.
150 years.
It was a symbolic gesture, a way for the judge to acknowledge the immense scale of his crimes and the profound impact they had on so many lives.
150 years. That's essentially a life sentence.
Yeah. Madoff died in prison in 2021 at the age of 82.
Wow. And while he may have escaped true justice in the eyes of some, his name will forever be synonymous with financial fraud.
Absolutely.
What about the money? Was any of it recovered?
There have been ongoing efforts to recover assets and compensate victims.
Okay.
Irving Picard, the court-appointed trustee, has been working tirelessly to track down the missing billions.
Right.
He's managed to recover a significant amount, but for many victims, it's just a fraction of what they lost.
It must be incredibly frustrating for those who lost everything, knowing that the man who stole from them is gone.
Yeah.
But the money that they worked so hard for is still largely unaccounted for.
Yeah. The Madoff case left a lot of unanswered questions, not just about the missing funds, but also about the systemic failures that allowed this scheme to go undetected for so long.
It's hard to believe that the SEC, with all its resources and expertise, could miss something this big.
There was certainly a lot of finger-pointing in the aftermath of the scandal.
Yeah.
The SEC was criticized for its lack of oversight, for failing to act on the warnings they received, and for allowing Madoff to operate with such impunity for decades.
What about the feeder funds? Didn't they have any responsibility to their investors to do their due diligence?
They absolutely did, and many of them faced lawsuits from investors who felt they'd been misled or had their funds mishandled.
It seems like a lot of people were asleep at the wheel, blinded by the allure of easy money.
That's a big part of it. There's a psychological element at play here.
Yeah.
When people see others making money, especially when it seems effortless, it can lead to a suspension of disbelief,
Right.
a willingness to overlook warning signs.
It's a cautionary tale, really a reminder that greed can cloud judgment and that even the most sophisticated investors can fall victim to scams.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of due diligence, of asking questions, of being skeptical, and of not being afraid to walk away from an investment that seems too good to be true.
So what can we learn from the Bernie Madoff saga? What are the key takeaways that can help us avoid falling victim to similar schemes in the future?
I think the biggest lesson is the importance of being an informed investor.
Okay.
Don't rely solely on reputation or charisma.
Right.
Do your own research, understand the risks involved, and if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
It's also a reminder that there's no such thing as a guaranteed return.
Right.
Especially in the world of investing. If someone's promising you consistently high returns with little to no risk, that's a huge red flag.
Exactly. And diversification is crucial. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread your investments across different asset classes and consider seeking independent financial advice from a trusted professional.
I think it's also important to be aware of our own biases.
Yes.
We all have them. And sometimes our desire for wealth or security can make us vulnerable to scams.
That's right. Be aware of your emotions when making financial decisions.
Yeah.
And don't let greed or fear cloud your judgment.
The Madoff case was a tragedy on many levels.
It was.
It shattered lives, eroded trust, and exposed vulnerabilities in our financial system. But it also offered valuable lessons about the importance of due diligence skepticism and protecting ourselves from those who seek to exploit our desire for financial gain.
And that, I think, is the legacy of Bernie Madoff.
Yeah.
A cautionary tale that reminds us to be vigilant, to be informed, and to never underestimate the power of greed.
This has been a fascinating, albeit unsettling, deep dive into the world of Bernie Madoff. We hope you found it insightful and that it's given you some valuable things to consider as you navigate the complex world of finance.
Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and stay vigilant.
not just to entertain you, but also to uncover the lessons hidden in the ruins.